My name is Cristina. I'm guessing you all know me by now. I've been talking at you for a couple of days now. I'm president currently of MNA, and we're here to talk about some of the history of the Minnesota Naturalists Association, which is why we've invited Siah, St. Clair, and Sigford here to have a panel discussion, and so they have things they would like to share with us. I have some questions I wrote down, but if you have questions, we'll invite those too. And I did bring a note card somewhere, but if you have something you don't want to maybe say out loud and want to write it down, we could do that too.
Are we just gonna know?
They will be reviewed. So I'm going to start by introducing our guests today. So Siah St. Clair, I'm just going to go through your list here. Master's degree in environmental education from Michigan State University. Director of a nature center in Wethersfield, Connecticut for 6 years. And then the director of Springbrook Nature Center in Fridley. Anyone want to guess how many years?
30?
Big number. 35 years. Which is
And he's still alive.
And that's where I crossed paths with Siah. He's one of the people who hired me when I was very new in the field as a seasonal actress when Tara was on maternity leave for her now post-college age. So, anyway, Siah's been a member of MNA for many years and a former president of MNA. Both of them are former presidents of MNA. I'm going to skip these two. Co-chair of the NAI National Conference in St. Paul in 1989 and chaired numerous other regional and state conferences over the years. Master instructor of advanced hunter education in Minnesota for the DNR for a long time. Licensed bird bander for over 40 years. Many of you might know this book. He published a book with John Moriarty in 2018, A Field Guide to the Natural World of the Twin Cities.
It's a great book.
And
The
Siah's
photography is awesome.
Yep, Siah's a photographer, so his photos are all over that book. And then this one is really interesting too. Chair since 2018 of the Red-Headed Woodpecker Recovery Project. So that was kind of fun. And reading Ann's bio, I didn't know as much about Ann because I haven't worked directly with Ann, although we have a Woodlake Nature Center connection. And so I want to read this because she's a writer and I want to read it just as she has written it. Ann Sigford.
Siah, you're not a writer, I guess.
Tough crowd.
Yeah.
Ann Sigford is an eager learner, storyteller, and writer. She started her higher education with a summer course in archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. At the University of Minnesota, she attempted to major in every known subject, eventually taking bachelor's degrees in wildlife management and elementary education, and also a master's degree in aquatic biology. Favorite jobs include working 20 years as a naturalist and manager at Woodlake Nature Center in Richfield, and a shorter stint at the Solar Trail Center in Colorado Springs. She was a longtime member of the Minnesota Naturalists Association and also president. She writes daily and has written 2 books for young people called Tall Grass in Trouble and 8 Words for Thirsty, and is churning away on a memoir, which I feel like will be amazing, just based on this bio. She loves water. When she lived in Duluth, Minnesota, she served as ship's scientist on Lake Superior for the University of Wisconsin, worked for Lake Superior Center and was the scientific outreach coordinator for the EPA's Freshwater Quality Lab. Part of that job was serving on the EPA Vessel Lake Explorer. She was director of the College of St. Scholastica's Plus Center, which presented programs in math and science for underserved populations. At the age of 40, she met a Swedish man and made a new family with his 2 daughters. When the girls were independent, she followed him to his farm in Sweden, where they lived for 15 years, which was an education in itself. She learned to sing in a Swedish church choir, chainsaw, measure logs, plant trees, hunt moose, deer, and wild pigs, and prepare them over the farm's wood-cook stove. She also took 3 years of naturalist training in Swedish and was active in a nature interpretive association called
Naturkulturguider I Glasriket. It's just fun, you know. Nature and culture guides in the kingdom of glass.
She also learned to repair antique windows and horse wagons. She bought and trained 2 fjord horses for riding, pulling wagons, and hauling logs from the woods. When there was a pinch, she taught English to junior high students, a job that was much more frightening than hunting wild boars. The daughters also found true loves and are married with 1 child each. She She is an active grandma to a little boy in Rochester and less often with one in Oslo, Norway. In Rochester, she is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church, sings in the choir, and loves doing manual labor on the property that will become a new home for the church. So, thank you for that. I want to just start by allowing each of you to just share some opening remarks of what you'd like to talk about MNA and your beginnings with MNA.
You started before I did.
Okay, he said I started before he did. I didn't really think of them as opening remarks, but I noticed that there was the previous workshop or concurrent sentence session on getting a job. And I understand that that is a big issue because so many people really think that this profession is something special. It is extraordinary. And a reason I love coming to an MNA meeting is that I feel so at home because it's hard to say. You guys have a certain aura. You know, people who are working in environmental education, they have big thoughts and big goals of what they would like to accomplish. And then when you add all of the benefits of being in nature and being outside with like-minded people, it's a wonderful thing. So I understand the huge competition for positions. And there's no easy way. You have to find the place where you fit as an individual and like it the best. So I would like to mention one thing about the time when all of the nature centers sprang up and then eventually there became an MNA. But it was like a blossoming of an unusual time in American history. Every time is unusual, but just then there was Vietnam War protests, and there were the first, the environmental movement was just waking up at that time, and with human rights, that was all waking up at this time. It had been decades since Maria Montessori had the idea of child-centered education, but it didn't break through until 1960s and 1970s, where suddenly we respected more than they ever had before, that children were individuals and full of curiosity and bubbling, and if you can introduce the child to an environment where they can learn, that they can blossom, and it can be a life-changing experience. I'd like to throw in two little comments about the women's movement, because I came out of high school in 1967 and then was at the university, and I couldn't find my place very well, but I eventually found out about wildlife management and wanted to do that because it was outdoor oriented, it was hands-on, it was real, as opposed to books and memorizing things and spitting out things and so forth, just the reality of it. So I met the head of the department of the wildlife management curriculum. It was on the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. And I explained the things that I was good at and wanted to do. I'd always been outdoorsy and just loved all aspects of nature, and said, I think this would be the perfect program for me. And I remember how he kind of settled back in his chair a little bit. Yeah. And he looked at me and said, I've got to explain to you, there are no women in this program. There never have been. So all your classes are going to be men, and you'll be the only woman. And, you know, I grew up with big brothers. I kind of thought, so? Well, he said, well, they're going to graduate, and they are going to get the wildlife management jobs. There's never been a woman working in wildlife management. So you're going to do all this work for many years to get a wildlife management degree, and you will not get a job in the field. I looked at it, girl, well, maybe I'll just cope with that when that happens. And he's just like, well, I have to let you in. I have to let you in. Thanks for the support, pal. Later on, Dr. Frenzel became a mentor, but it took a while. And I loved my classes. I loved the men who were in the classes. They were all outdoorsy. It was like, I found my people finally. It was just a wonderful experience. and there was an assumption that every new graduate of a wildlife management degree was gonna work for the DNR. Like the Minnesota DNR in St. Paul, the big building there, and then go out in the field and, we young wildlife managers might be banding eagles or tracking wolves or finding out where the bears hibernate, all this stuff. So we all interviewed that. One day it was about this many people, and then you were called one by one into a room, and there was a guy with a great big desk, and you had a little chair right there. And they would open up something, and look at your resume and interview you. And the guy had done that to some of the students who had went out earlier. They came back and were like, "Oh, good job!" They were so excited. I was the last one to be called in. And when I went in, he said, "You have got a tremendous resume here. This is wonderful. I've got an idea for you. I think I could get some funding to send you to secretary school, and you could be a secretary for the DNR." And it was like, his face was like this. And I remember it's like I couldn't even comprehend it. And I have a little blackout. I don't actually know what I did. All I remember doing, I just walked out the door and opened another door. And I walked through the group of people who had now, all my friends were celebrating, they got jobs, and going down these stairs, the big steps in front of the DNR building. And I never stopped walking till I got home to South Minneapolis. But then I decided I would rather work as a volunteer at Wood Lake Nature Center for the rest of my life than work for 1 minute for the DNR. And that's what I started doing, and my whole career went from there. So, that about that.
I don't have quite as dramatic.
That's good.
Has to go to secretary school.
I was one of the guys, and they didn't offer me a secretary's job. So, but in the sense of, my comments would be more towards in the beginning. I want to go way back to the beginning when I was in college, and I was getting a degree in biology, because there weren't, at small universities, it was biology and chemistry and math, and that was it. I mean, there were no options for taking fish, wildlife management or anything like that. This just wasn't even on the radar of possibilities. And as I was getting close, like I think it was in my junior year, getting a degree in biology, and I realized somehow that the only job I could ever get with a degree in biology was taking urine samples at some clinic somewhere, and that wasn't what I wanted in my future. And so a couple professors gave me some advice, and I went up to Michigan State and talked to a fellow up there who was doing outdoor education, which is very different than environmental education. And at the end of a good long talk with him, he said, I don't think you're going to be a very good fit for what we want here. But we've got this guy who's just starting the first graduate program in the United States for environmental interpretation. Why don't you go talk with him? And I went over and I talked with him, Paul Risk, and I remember after he explained to me, I said, "You mean people actually pay people to do that kind of stuff?" I said, "Sign me up." And so that was it. And I got that degree in environmental interpretation, and then went and interviewed for that position, because you'd have to send resumes out. I did send resumes out all over the United States, and universities tell you, you want a 1-page or a 2-page. And today it's different because nothing is in paper; it's all online when you're doing this stuff. But back then it was on paper, so you had to have a 1 or at most a 2-page resume that you sent out. And I must have sent 50 of those out all over the United States and didn't get a response, not one response at all from a single one. And so I said, "This isn't working," and I put a 10-page resume together that had dumb things to me, like I would simply, I put some of my pictures in it from photography. I put my thesis synopsis in it. I put I sketched, I did tracings of pictures, of drawings, and I said they were tracings. And I said, this is a tracing, it's a full page picture, you know, of a red-tailed hawk or something like that. Looked really cool, but it was a tracing, for crying out loud. But back in those days, you know, before copy machines and things like that, so I can, any rate, every single place I sent the 10-page resume, I got a response from. Every single one. And so I ended up going to Connecticut and getting a job out there running a center that was just starting, and because everything was just starting in those days, and then eventually ended up here in Minnesota and at Springbrook and got the job as the director there. So that's that. And then sure, I came here in '78 and '79. A couple of things I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if you want to do this in a few minutes.
No, go ahead.
In '70. I came in '78. In '79, I got involved with MNA right away because I had been involved with the Connecticut Environmental Education Association, and they were just really forming and getting all their stuff formally done out there. And when I got involved in '78 and then early '79 with MNA, it was extremely informal. There were no real active membership kinds of things. I think a membership, if you wanted to be a member, was $5, and it was and the meetings were extremely informal. There was no formality to it at all. And there were a group of us that felt that the organization needed some formality, a little bit more formality to it. It needed to be organized and have some bylaws and things like that so that they can have things. And so at what we called the annual meeting, which was pretty informal, but it was an annual meeting that fall of MNA, fall of '79, they put it to a vote. I mean, in the meeting. There was nothing formal about these things back then, but they put it to a vote. So, well, should we become more formalized or should we stay informal the way we are right now? And the formalized part of it won greatly on that, and so then I remember they turned around and they said, well, if we just voted to become formalized, how is there a plan for how that's going to work? And so a couple of us were realizing all of a sudden that we hadn't even thought about, one of us, a little tiny group has to be president, one has to be vice president, one has to be treasurer, and one has to be secretary. And so we just sort of, you be this, you be that, you be, that's how it happened. That was how I became president. So that was how things started to become formal. And then shortly after that, Jim wrote the bylaws and the articles of incorporation and things. And so that would have been in 1980 that we did that. And so then everything happened, then after that. And then the other thing that I wanted to just mention is that in 1990, Jim Malkowski was going to be making a presentation at what was then the LCMR, now it's the LCCMR, if you go and ask for funds and things. Back then it was just the Legislative Commission on Minnesota Resources. And he was there the day before he was going to do his presentation, and another director of an environmental education facility in Minnesota made his presentation, and he stated that his facility was the only environmental education facility in the state of Minnesota. And so Jim called me and gave me that information that had happened, and offered that if we wanted to, if MNA wanted to educate the LCMR people, the senators and congressmen and the staff that were working there, that there was a much broader existence for environmental education going on in Minnesota. He would give us, he had a half an hour of time to make his presentation. He would give us 15 minutes of his time. So I called Ann, and Ann and I, Ann knew people that I didn't know, and I knew others, and we came up with a list of all of the environmental education places that we knew in Minnesota, and we made a little brochure, one-page brochure of it that we could hand out, and then we went and presented at this had our 15 minutes that we gave, and we basically showed them that there were all these different centers that provided environmental education, that there were millions and millions of dollars going into this every year. There were hundreds of people that were employed with it, and there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were being impacted by these different centers. And as a result, I don't think the legislators really did this too much, but the staff were very interested to find this out, and they put over $250,000 to do a study on environmental education centers and find out, and I'll just mention the very first meeting we had where all the nature center people, environmental education people found out that this was going to happen. All the directors met. It was just the directors met in one building at the same time, and it was the funniest thing because you had like the chalkboard back there, and the biggest problem was trying to get people to sit down and listen, because all of them were chiefs at wherever they worked, and they were the ones that were usually in the front, and they all wanted to be in front. But at any rate, because we had to come up with definitions of what were the different aspects and things of different kinds of environmental education centers. And I just wanted to, this is the EE study, the study of environmental education centers, EEC 2000. This came out in 1992, so this was a result of that. This is part one, this is part two. A lot of stuff in here, all about, and they're still using this at the state of Minnesota, the information that are in these books. And then another result that came out of that was a state plan for environmental education, that I've got right here. Another one was a guide for integrating environmental education in Minnesota schools. These are thick, and these are the only things I'm aware of that they have to this day after all these many years. But my point is that MNA informed the legislature of the state of Minnesota about what was going on with the industry of environmental education centers, and all of that. And today, how many people here, if you run a center, you've been to the LCCMR asking for money, or one of the other commissions or committees, and they're using these things as guidelines for who you are, where do you fit within all these categories and things like that. And these resulted from MNA being involved in informing the state. So that's just gets away from shooting wild boar and
Who was the person that was like, and we're the only one in Minnesota prior to?
we really want to name names.
Yeah, I mean,
More curiosity than
it's historical rather than anything else.
He was the director of Wolf Ridge.
Alright.
At that time, Wolf Ridge wasn't Wolf Ridge. Wolf Ridge was
Isabel.
Isabel, over in Chattagooch, at the camp over there. And then, and in his defense, in a way, when he came to that first meeting where all the directors were there, he was talking to me and he said, I have never been to another environmental education center ever. And the thing was, you have to understand, that was the beginning back then, like Ann was talking about, it really was. Those were the beginning days. And if you were an environmental education center, you were really pretty isolated. The only thing you really had was MNA, and if MNA didn't fit in with, what you were doing, things like that, MNA had, I think, about 25 members. After we became formal, within 2 years, we had over 125 members of that group. So it really, you need some formality to things in order to really reach out to that. But I think that Jack you really were, especially the residential centers, were really isolated. And it was a long ways to another residential center or another center or an environmental education center of any other kind. And so it's very easy to not have really been aware of what was going on in other places, because when you run a facility, you're really busy. You're working, day and nights going to council meetings and board meetings and speaking to the Lions Club to try to get money and all that kind of stuff. So you have to be so focused on trying to keep your facility running and there wasn't what's going on here right now. It wasn't this kind of interaction between all the centers back then.
And I thought that when I first started going to MNA meetings, the informal meetings, which would have been 1973 or 4, something like that, when I first started, was that they held the meetings at different nature centers all around, so you kind of had to go. And then it would be this eye-opening thing, because their land was different, the whole ecology of where they were working was different, their population was different, depending whether it's demographics, or is it only school kids, or is it only public programs, or is it residential, or what. The huge variety really stimulated me. I had no idea when I first took those uncertain steps in the early days. So I really loved it that we went to each other and we got to learn what each other did, and to be respectful of what everybody did, because it was all different situations, different funding streams.
I want to speak to those early days that you mentioned.
Sure.
So when I started as president of the board at our very first board retreat, so January last year, we started talking about, well, when did MNA actually start? Because there was some ambiguity, and we also, the bigger question is, did we miss our 50th anniversary? That's
Yes.
what we were wondering about.
Yes,
Did we miss
as a
it?
matter of fact, yeah.
And
Yes.
you did. You totally missed it. So we'll get the next one.
But the next one, wait a minute.
But there's different versions of like what was the beginning of MNA, because there was the, when you became organized, but you speak of a time before that, and I've talked to Mike Link about when that started. So a couple questions is first of all, what are your recollections of how MNA got started? And I know you maybe weren't at the very, very beginning. But also, how did you find your way to MNA? Because now we think about how easy it is to reach people, but how in these isolated places are you finding each other? How did that happen?
It really had to happen through the administration of all of the different EE centers around the state. When I went to Wood Lake, they all said, well, we're going to an M&A meeting and we're not doing groups that day, and come on, you're just going. And I'm sure that happened at a lot of places. If the administration of the nature center or EE center was not into it or hadn't heard about it, it would be very, very hard for you to find out and go. So it was that group where there was some administrative support that started. And Mike was tremendously respected in what he did. He was brave. I think 1971 was the year he started doing programs, in the same year that Wood Lake had started doing programs. But I didn't show up in that scene until 73, and he was well established and quite a leader. And we've got to know what each other is doing, and we got to move on this. When I went to wildlife management school, people were very unsure whether will there ever be wolves in Minnesota in the future, or will they only be in Canada and Alaska and Russia, or bald eagles? Are there going to be bald eagles? And peregrine falcons. There was kind of a feeling of crisis, like we have got to get the word out to people and help them be really engaged in the earth and the environmental movement, because it is life and death for us. We're part of this system. So there was really that mission. But if you were, you would have to have a supportive administration in your organization in order to hear about M&A.
So supportive and aware of it.
And aware, yeah.
I think Mike Link really did actually start, you could say he really started MNA. And it was right after Earth Day, that 1970, the first Earth Day. And so it might have been in 71, but it was, and it was informal. Like I said, but it was something, and it was a way for other environmental education places to have their staff go, other people go and find out about, what this is all about. And as those few years between 71 in like '79, when there was and I remember there were, okay, there's gonna be a nature center in St. Louis Park. There's gonna be a nature center over here. There's gonna be a nature center over here. And all of us were saying, oh my God, it's gonna pull the people away that I've got coming to my center. In the beginning, that's how you were, and you were kind of protective, of that kind of stuff, and you're worried about it. And it took a while to learn that the more environmental education centers there were, the better your ability was at your place to do your programs and to have people coming to your center. And so in the beginning, it was seen sort of as a threat, in a sense. If there was going to be another center over here, well, that's just a couple miles down the road. What's going to happen to my clientele and things like that? But it was the exact opposite. It's kind of like, when Target and one of those other, when they put them across the street from each other, or when a gas station goes in here and then another one goes in right across the street, you think one of them's gonna die. No, it doesn't work that way. It works the opposite way, and that's really the way it's worked with environmental education. And the more centers we have, the more the public becomes aware, and school districts become aware of the need for this, and how a center, an environmental education facility can help assist in meeting graduation standards and things like that, and so it's, but back in those days, it was very different. The feeling was very different. I don't know if that helps answer that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was your other question? How did you learn about it?
How did you find, so you came from Connecticut, how did you find MNA?
I think I found it because I had been involved with the Connecticut Environmental Education Association, and so I was looking for, what was the one that was here in Minnesota, and I found out pretty quickly that it was MNA, but also because I had been involved with, at that time, AIN, which was the Association of Naturalists before it became NAI. And because of that, I knew some people in the profession in Minnesota. And so when I first came here, I already knew some people, who were involved because of my connection with AI, back in those days, and NAI. So that was how I got involved in things. I didn't quite intend to get as involved as I did. Very quickly after coming.
Did MNA and AIN do a conference together sometime in the 70s? Because I remember an artifact on the wall at Dodge of a squirrel being run over by a tire track advertising said conference. And it was like a squirrel skin, right? I think Jim Malkowski after some time.
Yes, we did. We did. Because there weren't as many. When we came a few minutes ago, when we drove in here, and looked at, because we had been talking, well, how many people do you think are going to be, at this conference as we come around the corner out there's all these cars, well, I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about very many people being here. There's plenty of people being here. But back in those days, there weren't that many, anywhere near as many. And so in order to have a viable conference, you really needed to join with these other groups and do the conferences together, because each group individually didn't have the resources usually to be able to hold a very big conference. But if you merged your resources together, and so there was quite often the regional NAI group and MNA, would do the conference together.
I was wondering, sort of following up on that, it's always felt to me, so I worked for the Forest Service, and it's felt like that's diverged again, that you don't see agency people at MNA meetings, that they're all NAI. And Gordon Dietzman with National Parks and me, but also the DNR people, you don't see them here. And I've never figured out why they aren't here, because we're all doing the same things.
And there, and I felt the same way. I remember feeling that happened in the beginning. Everybody was kind of coming, and then it started. You're right. It diverged, and they weren't coming anymore. And I don't want to take credit for this, but at one point I was feeling we need something to be able to have all these people come together again, so that we're all talking to each other, and because then the residential facilities had kind of their own organization where they were, and so a couple of other people and I got together and thought we would form this organization called the Minnesota Association of MNA. And I ended up writing the bylaws and doing all that myself for that and putting the whole thing together and stuff. And the whole point of it was the idea was that it would be an umbrella for everybody, all these different groups, so they could all come together, but it didn't work. And it didn't work. There's just, I remember how disappointed it was, that the goal was to try to have were the heads or the people who were the directors or whatever from all these different kind of agencies and things, but it didn't work at all.
No.
And
I think in some of the, excuse me.
Louise.
Oh, I'm just curious about the female representation in the early days. Did you have women with teaching backgrounds coming into the field, men with wildlife backgrounds coming into the field? Speak to that, I don't know.
There were very few coming in with an education background. And that was personally to me, it was a little bit distressing because I'd only worked at Wood Lake, and to learn to work with children is a huge thing to learn how to do. You're not born with that. And when I started, I realized I didn't know how to work with a group, and how do you handle all the things that happen with a group of small children outside? I didn't know. But when school groups came, I could see right away the difference between, you've all seen this, a good teacher and a not so good teacher. Good teacher comes in and it's just so natural and it's so easy and everybody's kind of working in the same direction, and it's not that you only see the one, the bad kid, that's the one you remember. And I got so fascinated, so I asked talk about having support from above, from the administration. Wood Lake, while I was working at Wood Lake, they let me get my elementary education degree so that I could learn some of those tricks, and it made such a difference. We did not have very many professional educators at all in there. And it started out, I would say, male heavy, but it switched very, very fast to 50-50 or possibly more women than men coming in. What do you think about that, Siah?
I think I would say the same thing. I think another perspective on it was that I know when I retired, I had been keeping the paper for all the years I was running nature centers, and I had the names of everybody, and there were hundreds that I had hired. Some of you were.
Many of you.
But at any rate, the thing was that I think that I always felt this way, and I don't know how true or accurate this was, that when we hired people, I was always embarrassed at the rate that we were able to offer, and so
by salary, you mean?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even a salary; it was an hourly rate. Because very few of the people we actually hired ended up being salaried people. They were as many part-time on paper positions as you could glue together over a course of a year and not break federal law, and have them, working part-time, but the amount we were paying. And so I always kind of felt bad about it, but it just seemed like we ended up with more women, and maybe that was a very good thing, in the positions because they wanted this experience really bad, and the position wasn't paying very much, and the guys could get jobs if they had to in a factory or something like that, to keep themselves going or something. And but I know that the way overwhelming majority of the people that I had over all those years were female. And I think it was much more so true towards the end. Some of you here that are males that were were also a part of that whole cadre of, you know, of people that were there, but it was, yeah, it was, I don't know, yeah, it's just, usually when you're the director, you're hiring the best people you could get who are gonna be able to connect with them. And I remember there were times when I was very focused on like for summer camp or something like that, I tried to hire a guy and a gal so that if I had only 2 people I could hire. And probably a lot of times because you had half the kids were little boys and half the kids were little girls, and there were points where you all had to bring them in for potty breaks and stuff like that, and so it was a little easier to have a guy that could go in if there were issues in the boys' restroom and stuff like that. It got very difficult, and there were times when we had 2 guys, you know, hired for the summer, and sometimes when we had two women hired for the summer, and that. So it was, I don't know if that answers your question or
Totally
not.
does.
Difficult.
Yeah.
I have another question, but there are many of you in here. Does anyone else have any questions you wanna ask at the moment? Maybe you're. I'm wondering, what were your long-term hopes for MNA? And 2-part question, do you think we have achieved them or are achieving them?
I know about hopes, but it's been a long time since I was involved in MNA because I was, you know, took off to Scandinavia for all those years. But my wish was just as what Siah has been talking about, that we can get together and be stronger, because we know we're a hell of a lot smarter when we're together than when we're alone. So for me, that was it. And then the broader vision that we'll always have is, can we be kinder to the earth and make this a better place for everybody? You know, the 4-footeds and the 2-footeds and the 6-footeds and the 8-footeds, you know, for them all to be okay.
72 footage.
72,000 footed, yeah, okay.
I think, Ann sent us, mission statements from an old one, and the beginning, the first one, and the new one. And you have those right there?
I have the old, or the current one is.
Okay. But do we have the old one?
I could try to pull it
You
up.
got the bottom right there?
Wait, what?
Would it be in those folders? Or can you find it?
Talk about your thing, I'll look for it.
I doubt if it's in here, because this was not about MNA and the stuff that was going on with MNA. It was the state got very, wanted to be, not be influenced, and so but anyway, the first mission statement for MNA dealt with, this mission was to,
Train the interpreters.
train the interpreters, how to be effective interpreters. And it was a very, very simple mission statement, and that was it.
Yeah,
you know,
and they called it a purpose.
Yes.
Our purpose is to.
And so, and then I was looking at
Oh, okay, I've got it here.
you've got,
The first newsletter appeared in 1977, and by 1980, the organization had a constitution that defined a formal purpose to promote quality interpretation of the Minnesota environment by advancing the skills of Minnesota interpreters.
so it's advancing the skills is the important thing that's on there. And now MNA exists to advance natural and cultural resource interpretation for the purpose of fostering wise stewardship of all resources. And it's a little bit the same, but is changed at the same time. But I think that over the years, you see the same thing happening, because really what you're here, in addition to coming in and finding out about how to get jobs someplace, like the last session that was in this room, is that you do learn, is that MNA is still focusing on skills and learning skills and things like that. And that's, I think, from a hope standpoint, from way back then, the only hope you had back then was that you could still, number one, find people who were willing to be president or on the board of directors, you know, because that was always seemed the hardest thing, was to find people who were willing to be leaders on the group and to continually keep it going. And if so, then the hope is that you're gonna still focus on those learning skills and things like that, so that, I mean, culture changes as time, and so this is, the mission statement now is more inclusive in things. Yes, you have a question? A
Yeah, no,
comment?
obviously you guys have been working on your mission statement. How does it compare with NAI's mission statement? Because they've evolved their mission statement maybe similar to the way MNA has, and maybe there's no connect to NAI, which you've brought up a couple of different times.
Ooh, yeah, I haven't seen.
Who's got Chat GPT on their phone?
Well, I'm just
You
wondering,
didn't
what
know.
is there a connection? Because I've always seen MNA very isolated compared to other states in their involvement with NAI and their efforts and then their connection. And so I've always seen MNA be kind of like, we are who we are and they're over there. I'm just curious how.
I think NAI has, its mission is larger. It encompasses more interpretive kinds of activities that go on, and a lot of skills that would be hard to have people. I mean, big parts when you go to their conferences are the winners of who did the best video, who created the best video in the last year, you know, and you have hundreds of applications of people with videos that have presented them and things like that they're using for interpretation at their site and things like that. You're never gonna have that. You wouldn't have that kind of thing happening with MNA. And I don't know if you found it.
Yeah, so mission of NAI is inspiring leadership and excellence to advance heritage interpretation as a profession. And then the vision is NAI is the recognized voice of interpretation.
So you see that it's heritage, and it doesn't mention environment in it, in the mission statement anymore for that, and that's evolved over time that way. And so that's what I mean about it being so much broader, and that. So so I think for MNA, in order to exist, it has to have, and I think that's very, very good. You have a narrower focus, because the kinds of skills you need in order to be successful at your independent sites are in a narrower focus than what NAI is. You can go to NAI conferences and learn a lot and interact with people and get really good stuff. But I think that MNA.
You're a recipient of an NAI award.
Pardon me?
I said you're a recipient.
I am. Yes, I am.
For a video.
Like Naturalist of the Year, I think.
Use that word.
Interpretive Manager of the Year, yes.
It's
which was-
interesting that the NAI one seemed like it was really inward facing, that it's interpretation as a profession, whereas the MNA one was talking about influencing the outside world.
Yep.
And
Having the skills to be able to influence the outside world, yes. Yes, very much so.
I fire up MAE's mission statement.
I'm very contrast. I want to mention, so Brett is the vice president, the incoming president of MNA, and this week as I was digging into this talk that we were going to have, we dug into the mission of MNA for the purpose of fostering,
Advanced natural and cultural research interpretation for the purpose of
You
fostering.
hold that side.
That's why I put it on 2 pages, so you can each. In any case, I'm thinking about us here at the conference, and we do these things, but I feel like MNA, in the time that I've been involved, not just on the board, but just as a participant, a lot of the focus has been on networking and meeting people and community, which isn't reflected in the mission statement. So Brett and I were talking about that, and he thought he might explore that in the coming years. Community is a really big deal.
It
in
is.
MNA.
Right. I mean, the stewardship word, though, I mean, that's such a big piece in there, right? Yeah. And so I think for that whole aspect of what it is we do as a profession, and you touched on it, where you said, I mean, we're all a part of this. What happens to stuff out there happens to us. And, and setting the stage for our program participants, people that come to our parks to walk our trails, and helping them understand that and see that and connect them so that it isn't just I love nature. No. I want to be a steward of nature. It's different. That's action, right? And so that's a part of it that no matter what happens in conversations with, mission wise, like that piece is going nowhere. Like that's got to be there. So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Question. So, as getting the organization going and the founders and things like that, what were your feelings of like letting it go and be in the world and stepping back? And was there any anxiety about it's gonna take on a new form, or it's gonna become a monster, or it's gonna be I don't know.
Boy, but for me personally, I always had so much faith in the naturalist community and, naturalist interpreter, there's so many different words to use, but I always had so much faith that we were actually all kind of holding hands and going in the same direction. So I had no fears at all. And yes, it can go in this way for some years, but then it can go in that way some years. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't remember having a lot of anxiety about that. The only anxiety I remember ever having is, oh gosh, how are we gonna get another vice president or president?
Yeah, to step up and be a leader, perhaps.
It isn't because the skills aren't out there. It's because when you're working at one of these centers, man, you give it all. You really hard, and it's exhausting. It really is. And so for someone to come and ask you, would you be on the board of directors, of this, it's like, holy cow.
You mean another meeting?
Yeah. How many meetings are that gonna be? And that kind of, but I don't remember, I never had, I agree entirely with what Ann just said, that you just, after you've been involved for a bit of time, it's like there's a culture that's there, and the culture wants to continue. The culture wants to continue, and it will continue in some form or other, whether you can find someone that's gonna be willing to run, for being on the board of directors or something like that. It's just, because if you didn't have the board, it was kind of like, I remember there was one time when my board of directors at Springbrook, the Friends of the Nature Center kind of thing, they were getting kind of tired and old and didn't want to, and the chairman came to me and he said, well, a couple of us have been talking lately about there really isn't any use anymore for the Springbrook Nature Center Foundation. And I said, if you guys decide to fold, tomorrow I will get on the phone and find a whole nother group of people, and we will form a brand new Friends of Springbrook Nature Center, because it is that important in order to be able to have it. And I think the same thing would be true here. If you had a group that said, man, this is just too much, I just can't keep going to meetings and doing this stuff. But there's enough need. It isn't just the culture, it's a need, individual needs that people have in order to have this kind of thing happening, that it would just resurrect and keep going. I really,
Are there trends that you obviously have watched a lot, 40, 50 years of trends, and that may or may not be reflected in a mission statement, but that you see, right now this trend, and this may be not a current trend, but forest bathing. Are nature centers offering that as this whole idea of mental health that comes, it seems that it's just been bombarding our world. I don't know. Those trends kind of.
Yeah, there is one trend that I had mentioned to Ann when we were talking about this. And it's a little different from what you're asking, and I'll get back to that. But the only reprimand I ever had in my 42-year career as a director of nature centers was when we were having problems having people come to Friday night specials at Springbrook Nature Center. There'd be 5 people show up. We'd have really good speakers, really good entertainment kinds of things going on these Friday night specials, but we couldn't get people to come out. And there was a Burger King down the street, and the manager of that used to come and walk, and we kind of got to know him a little bit. I was talking to him one day about this. We says, well, you know, I could give you a coupon, and so that when people came, they could get a coupon for free fries at the Burger King. And then what we could do is we could put a coupon at the Burger King that they would get in that was a free, instead of paying 50 cents to get in, they could get in free to the Nature Center for the Friday night special that we were doing. And okay, 50 cents, folks. It's 50 cents. And it's 50 cents. We went from 5 people, and I'm not kidding on this, we went from 5 people to 100 people on Friday night specials for 50 cents. And they didn't have to pay anything because they got the coupon at Burger King. So they got in for free. But I ended up with a reprimand in my file because we were not allowed to charge anything for programs because the city felt that the tax dollars were paying for all the programs, and so people should be free. I said, 5 people, 100 people, it's 50 cents. But the trend I'm thinking is that I went from a place where you were not allowed to charge for any of the programs you were doing, and look at what is happening today. I mean, the focus, if you're running a nature center today, anywhere, one of your main focuses is revenue. How am I gonna bring revenue in? I need more revenue. I need to hire another person somehow. I have to make enough revenue to pay for that person, you know? And so it got to the point where I think when I retired, we had to make, it was well over 30% of our budget had to be made through revenue in order to sustain what we were doing. And so it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know? That's a trend, and I think that's true for everybody. You know, everybody is revenue focused today on the things that you do, and everything you do is charging for stuff. And one of the things about that is that it changes the clientele a little bit, because, you know, if you're charging, I don't know, how much does it cost to have a summer camp now, you know? How much? Nobody knows?
I
mean, it depends on
Yeah, it depends on the camp.
the camp.
150.
How much would that increase?
$150
Yeah.
for a 1 week, for a 4-day camp, $150. Okay.
I was looking at some old Wood Lake brochures, it was $7 for the week.
Okay, so,
I have some of those Canadians on
Yeah.
my desk.
but are there, I mean, when I used to have day camps in the summer and we didn't charge anything because we weren't allowed to, anybody could come. Anybody could come. But now you have to be able to afford $150 for your child for 4 days, you know, in a camp. And that's what I mean about that trend has changed, I think, amazingly. And I'm sorry, there was something else you mentioned about trends.
I said, forest bathing.
Mental health, yeah.
Mental health.
I mean, mental health, really what that's all about, but.
Are you thinking mental health as opposed to science? Is that what
Correct,
you're
yeah.
saying? Because they can be
Just seeing
incorporated.
this major effort of at least showing up in the literature and showing up at the Arboretum and, you know, just going to these places, your nature center, your place, you know, Wood Lake, all these, and you just go out there and commune with nature. Not learn anything about biology, ecology. And I don't know, maybe I'm head of the hounds and it's not true, or you guys
No.
all see it.
I think there is effort placed in that realm by interpretive centers today, in the sense that they create a lot of self-guiding kinds of things, and they have a lot of self-initiative opportunities for the public when they come in and can do things. I mean, when you go back and you're walking down a trail at some center someplace, and you walk, all of a sudden, an area that's supposed to be nature doesn't have a single stick in it except for the teepee. That's all the sticks are piled up over here or something like that, and where the kids can play, and you have playgrounds in a sense with nature type materials and things in them, but play areas for kids, and so none of that is being guided by or instructed by an interpreter that's out there. It's all self stuff, and there's a lot more emphasis on exhibits. I mean, people let a lot more money in. Centers are putting a lot more money on exhibits today than when I got started, where everything that was on exhibit was something that I had picked up off than roadkill that I had gone out and skinned and tanned and or made a skeleton out of or whatever, or caught the fish and put it in an aquarium or something like that. The exhibits today are amazing and that, so yes, in that sense. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, Stephen, is that the kind of thing?
I think there's trends that kind of go up and down, and I'm curious, you as M&A people have to sort of monitor maybe to see what are those current trends, and maybe those are what you learned at the NAI conferences or
Yeah.
Nature preschools.
I have a tiny.
nature preschools, yeah.
That like took over our whole world.
They took you made money.
Pokemon Go.
Pokemon Go.
You make more money with your preschoolers than you do with your other program. But yeah, there's big trends. So it's kind of interesting. I do like the French fry story though. That should be featured in one of the newsletters.
Yeah, magic. I was curious if those who work for a federal agency or a state agency, do you have to bring in revenue all the time?
I didn't have to bring in revenue all the time. In fact, we were told we were not allowed to charge because it was through your tax dollars.
That's what we
Exactly.
have to with local government with property tax levies.
Yeah.
So it isn't everybody who's in that boat.
That's true.
You know, we were
now
municipal.
admittedly, as a federal worker, what has happened to my job?
Oh,
It's vanished.
It's gone.
But, so you do have to actually have people who are willing to be taxed to afford such things, and when you vote in incompetent, no, I'm
Oh, yeah, sorry.
But one thing I was curious just to add on to what you were saying in there, and hopefully that wasn't offensive to anybody, or maybe
Never mind. Just go on. Just go on.
is in addition to like forest bathing and stuff, it seems like when I was a kid, it was more nature science nerd. And now there's been an incorporation of a lot more social justice issues and stuff that to me is really broadening beyond what maybe naturalists are necessarily connected to. And some of, I really like those things. And I'm never sure exactly how to balance those kind of things together while still appeasing the nature science nerd and to know that was a refuge for me as a kid.
Yes.
That going to that harder science nature class was really what I wanted out of that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I really resonate with that because I think that's the core of what we're doing. But I understand with these trends at Wood Lake for a little while, I sort of moving to the social justice parts, and then it was like gasoline problems, and I have a group of kids and we would go and we would count how many people were in the cars who went on 66th Street or something. You know, was it one person in a great big car, or was it, several people in a big car? And then we decided, no, get back to the nature that is there. That's really, really gotta be the heart. And there can be these other things that spin off from it. But I think the heart should be good science, and done with a gentle hand and enthusiasm and kindness, but not put too much of a burden on especially younger children that they have to save the world. The world's gonna be fine, by the way. The world's gonna be fine. Well, it used to be,
the world is gonna be fine, there's
Yes, I
going
know,
to be
but
grasshoppers. Not worried about the grasshoppers.
Yeah, so that was my opinion, is to emphasize the nature part of it. But the European perspective, they really like the forest bathing, so I was involved a little bit in forest bathing over there. And Sarah Holger at Whitewater State Park, I think it is, boy, she was certified in that and really did a fabulous program that I saw where people were somewhat transformed in 1 hour of forest bathing. So it's powerful, and I think there's a place for that.
But it's engaging audiences that may not have already come out to do things in a different way, that are guided by a person to do such things.
Yeah.
You're gonna have people coming in and just walking because that, for them, is recreationally, that's not, they want to be in the nature, but they're not content to learn about it at that point. They're getting the steps in.
Yep.
And they're following the path that they'd like to follow. Some of them end up falling into the trap of observing what's happening around them as the season changes. And some of them fall even into further traps where they're identifying the birds, taking pictures,
Yes.
and then,
They have
but
Merlin
this
on their
is not
phone and-
like largely beyond our control at many places where it is, we are maintaining these islands more or less for people to be able to come out and immerse themselves in the experience that we're giving to them in the way that they choose. There's other times where we're very specifically programming for them, whether it's camps or nature preschools, whatever have you, forest bathing, what have you, where you're directing it very consciously, but other times, no, you don't get to pick, but somebody's liking to make a stick for it.
But you can design trails that enhance that potential.
But you put up the signs that people will sometimes, you get a regard that people might ignore.
Well, but just if you make turns in the trail regularly so that they see a new thing. There's been a number of research things that's what I did research on when I was getting my master's. And if you make those turns so people experience a new environment, a new regime that they're seeing in front of them on a regular basis, they have a heightened response to learn and stuff like that. And so if you can create those things instead of having wide trails that dump trucks can get down to maintain your trails, without burning any curves in them, makes a huge difference. But
I bet we continue this at lunch, right?
Yes, I was just gonna say, this has been a riveting conversation. Anna and Siah are sticking around for lunch, and I'm sure there will be many people that will want to chat with you at lunch. But I want to thank you for the conversation, thanks for the questions here. Our member meeting is happening at 12:30, so it will be in the lunchroom, so you might still be enjoying your lunch.